Cause maybe you didn't belong to a group or a clique. Maybe they decided to pick you last for basketball or everything. Maybe you used to bring bruises and broken teeth to show and tell but never told. Because how can you hold your ground if everyone around you wants to bury you beneath it? You have to believe that they were wrong.
Okay, if you had told me years ago I would be one day interviewing the SHANE KOYCZAN, I would not have believed it. I would not have believed it. Y'all, some famous poems of his that you've probably seen before are To This Day, The Crickets Have Arthritis, Tomorrow, Places, Shoulders, Remember How We Forgot, Troll, right? Like these are some bangers, bro. So like, come on, y'all got to check it out. Check out the man behind the poems. I just want to thank each and every one of you who's been watching my videos for years, because y'all are the reason why I got his attention in the first place. Thank you, thank you, thank you, each and every one of you. Y'all are going to enjoy this, and you're going to want to watch to the end, specifically because we each share a poem on the topic of treasure. And it's just really crazy that I get to share poetry alongside someone I've looked up to, a role model, a pioneer in the game, like arguably the most viral poet in YouTube history, yet also the most humble poet in history. All right, let's get started. What is up, YouTube? It is your boy, your poet, Kendrick Youngblood, and I have here a great, a phenomenal, a giant in the game, SHANE KOYCZAN. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man, and I just want to say right off the top that I'm really thrilled to be here and talk with you finally. I know we've been trying to make this work for a while, and your patience has just been such a blessing to me as well, because I've been pretty busy. So it's nice to have somebody who has such flexibility when it comes to doing stuff like this. A lot of people they tend to be quite rigid, you know, so it's nice to sort of work with somebody who's like, all right, let's, whenever we can make it happen. And you've been really great at that. And so I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I can say, just like a lot of people, that your poetry has greatly impacted my life. I found you when I was getting bullied hard, like in middle school, and seeing your poem To This Day. That was the first poem I ever got introduced to, like first spoken word poem I ever got introduced to in general.
Wow.
And I didn't even understand it was poetry I was seeing at the time. I had no idea. I just thought like, oh, he's just really good with words, and that's awesome. He's a great storyteller. It didn't make sense in my head that that was poetry, but it resonated with me and changed me for the better. So I just want to start off by saying thank you for that. Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I'm really, I feel really honored that so many people have responded to it in such a positive way. Like, I mean, there's the chiaroscuro effect, the light and shadow sort of effect, because, as much as like people were really drawn to that piece, it drew the trolls as well, right? The people who were like, get over it, and which was like, it's interesting to see people in the comments sort of going to bat and being like, no, man, you don't know, you're on the other side of this. So I'm really grateful that people really picked up on that piece,
And how did you even get into spoken word in the first place? I know you've probably answered this question many times, but I have to ask it.
Well, I grew up in Yellowknife, first of all, which is a very small community in Canada's Arctic. So a pretty isolated place, and didn't have friends really. And then when I was raised by my grandparents and they decided to retire, they wanted to move somewhere warmer, obviously. So we ended up moving to Penticton, British Columbia, which is another small town. So there really wasn't a lot to do. And when I was in university, I had two really great writing professors, John Lent and Nancy Holmes. Nancy Holmes, during the course of our classes, made us put together an event, a poetry event, called a poetry sweatshop, which is probably a terrible name for it. But it was this really fun sort of thing where, basically you got a prompt and then you got 20 minutes to write a poem, and then everybody would go up and read their poems. And then, me and my friend, one of my first friends, Matt Bowen, was this a very super talented visual artist who does amazing stuff even now in Vancouver. He does like a lot of street art and wheat paste and stuff like that. Very cool guy. after that one event, we were kind of like, well, we should just start a regular poetry reading. And so we ended up in this little cafe called the Hog's Breath. And we approached them about like, hey, can we do a poetry reading here? And they were like, poetry, oh my god, because it's such a loaded word, right?
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't a prevalent thing at the time. Like it wasn't, you know, I'd never heard of slam poetry. I'd never, you know, we didn't know what we were doing. We just kind of like were wanting to, you know, start something. And so we started this poetry reading, and a lot of the times it was just him and I reading poems back and forth because people were, you know, nobody really wanted to participate, or people were shy to participate, you know. And eventually it grew over time, and we both ended up moving at different times to different places. And then I moved to Vancouver on the advice of my writing prof, John Lent, who basically just said, you know, like, look, if you want to be a writer, you're kind of just spinning your wheels here. You know, you are writing. You know, if you want to, you quit waiting for permission to write. You know, you just do it. And after that, I decided, you know, I might as well take, you know, save a little bit of money rather than going back to, you know, university the next year. And I decided to move to Vancouver. And from there, there was a weekly paper called the Georgia Straight, and they had this art section. It was basically the arts paper for Vancouver. And they had a section in it called the literary events section. And going through there, I started to find all kinds of like little poetry readings. There's a place on Commercial Drive called Bukowski's every Tuesday. They had Tales of Ordinary Madness. And through there is where I really sort of found community. And then I just saw a random poster on a street lamp when I was walking down the street one day. It said Poetry Slam. And I was like, well, what the hell is that? And so I went there, you know, armed with a poem to read. And then, you know, I didn't understand the rules of Poetry Slam at the time. So they were like, you did great. You made the second round. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, well, you need a second poem. And I didn't have one. So I ended up writing one during the break. There was another great poet there named R.C. Waslowski who, you know, he just gave me his notebook and a pen, and he's like, go for it. And I kind of fell in love with it through there, because one of the things that Poetry Slam does really well is teaches you to edit. You know, when I first started off, I thought like, God, 3 minutes, that's so long. And then 3 minutes becomes very, very short, you know, the more you go, because there's so much you want to say. And ended up on the national team and going to nationals, ended up in the finals, and then, you know, went back the following year and won, which was a really weird experience, because, you know, at the time, like, I mean, being there, I think it was in Chicago or Providence, Rhode Island. I can't remember which place we were. I think it was Providence, Rhode Island. And it was this huge celebration surrounded by this, you know, so many poets from across, you know, the U.S. and, you know, this one lonely Canadian team. Through everybody was just, you know, there was so much support and so much love for what I was doing. And then, you know, took the 3-day bus back to Vancouver, and just realized like there's not much here for me. Like, I mean, at the time, like one of the best things the US has going for it is density, you know, whereas Canada is very spread apart. So like, I mean, if you're wanting to do a tour, you're going from Vancouver to Calgary, to then the next province over, to then the next province over. And you're really only able to hit those sort of like major centers, or at least that's how it was in the beginning. Whereas the US had all these poetry slams going on and all these, you know, amazing places to go, you know, show what you were doing. And so ended up, you know, hopping buses and, you know, sleeping in Greyhound stations and on friends' couches and, you know, touring through the States, and sort of everything developed from there. And when I came back to Canada, I still did slam for a number of years after that, because, like I said, there's something that I really loved about it. It wasn't just that sort of like that automatic approval, that immediate sort of like, you know, there's something very rewarding about reading a poem and having people clap at you, but it wasn't about that. It was about that sort of developing the skill and sort of, you know, finding the way to. One of the things you have to do in writing, which, you know, sounds super harsh, but you have to kill your babies, you know. And that's like, it's one of those things where it's like everything you write is so precious to you. It's so like, oh, I love this, I created this, I birthed this. And then you realize like, oh, I love you so much, little stanza or whatever, but you don't belong. Exactly. And, you know, it's a really harsh sort of process. And even now I struggle with it. But what I've ended up doing is, you know, none of those things are lost forever. People ask me about writer's block, and, well, I don't really deal with it because I have a file on my computer called Purgatory. And it's where I send all those lines that become nothing, all those little half poems that don't end up anywhere. And anytime I'm feeling stuck, I can sort of go through there and find a new jumping off point. But yeah, that's basically how I got started. If you're talking about how I got started in terms of writing, it was my grandmother. Growing up without friends, I've talked about this a lot before, but growing up without friends, she could see that I was pretty depressed. And so, you know, she asked me one day, well, what is the problem? What's the issue? And I basically told her I don't have anyone to talk to. And she just grabbed one of those spiral bound notebooks from the shelf, and she handed it to me and gave me a pen and she said, here, you talk to this. And it's never going to judge you based on what you look like or what kind of clothes you wear or who you are. It'll always just be there to listen, and you can tell it anything. And that's how I got started with writing. And none of it was poetry at first. It was all just sort of, you know, like Jack Handy deep thoughts, you know, things like that. But over time, they became structured.
Wow. Okay. See, about
Sorry, that was probably a really rambling answer. I'm so sorry.
Perfect answer, because I can actually relate in a lot of ways, in the sense that, for starters, I actually have a document as well where I throw lines that didn't belong in a poem but might belong in a future poem. You know,
right? Yeah.
It's so useful. I call it the document of useful ideas. Like, because I hate throwing something away for good. It's a
far better name than Purgatory. You know, but something feels so good about lifting something out of purgatory. You know,
exactly. Yeah. And so, man, I'm glad I'm not the only one who does that. You're the only other person I've heard that has a document dedicated to those lines that you had to temporarily discard, you know?
I think it's one of the best ways to sort of chart your growth. Like, I mean, even the stuff that you throw away or you don't think is good has value. Mm-hmm. When I went through a really bad depression, my grandmother came to me with all those books I'd written in as a kid, and she said, you know, here, this is you, and, you know, here are your diaries. And I was like, those are journals, first of all. And at first I didn't want to go through any of it because I was like, God, school was so bleak for me. There's nothing in here of any interest or value. But, you know, morbid curiosity takes over, and I started to go through them and realized, holy doodle, there's a kid here with a sense of humor and, you know, like all those things that I was suddenly reminded of. And, you know, it was a boomerang, because one of the things that happened in school was school was really great at talking you out of what you really wanted to do with your life. You know what I mean? Yeah. Especially for the arts. And I don't blame school for that or counselors for that. A lot of the time school counselors, you know, their job is to put you on a path toward the career you're interested in. The unfortunate thing with the arts is there is no clear path, you know. You want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a firefighter or a policeman or whatever it is you want to be. There's usually a clear path for that as far as education goes. If you want to be an artist, you're kind of, you kind of have to break out that machete and carve out that path for yourself. There's no clear way to do it. Yeah. And that's pretty scary. So, sorry. A lot of the times I was met with counselors who were, really just sort of like, you're going to need some way to support yourself. And you're going to this will be fine as a hobby and things like that, things of that nature. Right.
Yeah.
So I understand where they were coming from. I'm just kind of, grateful that, I didn't listen, I guess, or I was stubborn about it. Because I really, that was my passion, and I couldn't see a life. My grandmother was very good at sort of, always setting my compass to true. She could do that in a lot of situations, because one of the other issues I grew up with was, and still deal with, is paranoia. So she was constantly having to sort of reset me in terms of, because it's hard when your mind is creating the narratives, and all of a sudden, it's like, makes it really hard to trust people. And so a lot of the times my grandmother would be, is that what's happening, or is it maybe this? And she gave me this really great tool that I've used throughout my life, where it's helped with writing as well. It's questions. She said, you just have to ask yourself questions. And it's the same with writing. But in my life, I'm constantly having to ask myself, what do I think? What do I know? What can I prove? And a lot of the times it helps me sort of mitigate the pitfalls of dealing with paranoia. And like I said, it helped me out tremendously with writing as well, because I think a lot of the times the best writing comes from questions, and just sort of answering those questions for yourself. I forgot what your original question was, so I don't know if I answered it or not.
It might not have been the answer I wanted, but it was the one I needed. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah. And I think you're right. A lot of the best poems arise from questions. Yeah, it's very true. Another thing I can also relate to is the fact that I actually was on a slam team myself that went to a national competition in the United States. And that's what really got me into poetry. I thought I loved poetry before, but competing, it was like there was a rush to it. And yeah, part of it, like you said, was, getting the scores and the applause. Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. But just like bettering myself each and every time, and not necessarily ranking it based on the scores I'm getting, like the quality of my poem, but more so the poems each kind of are like a snapshot of where I am in life.
Absolutely.
So as I'm writing, I'm able to look back and be like, wow, I'm improving not only as a poet, but as an individual, and there was a massive thrill that came from that. And so, yeah, joining the slam team for my university was the best thing I ever did. I have no regrets about that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you form some pretty unique relationships, and for me, like that sort of discovery of community after having spent so long as, that kind of loner kid, was huge, and finding acceptance through that. One of the most amazing things that writing did for me was sort of open up that part of me where we live in a world where so much of it is based on appearance. And my appearance throughout my life, has been one of those things that's like, oh God, it's, I've been called a myriad of things throughout my life based on my appearance. But it gave people a chance to see something different. And what they were looking at was the inside. Finally, I was able to show them this other part that, they had long ignored. Because they weren't willing to get to know me, because I didn't fit into the sort of, it's like, well, who wants to be friends with, that guy? And, a lot of kids grow up different in school, and they have that sort of very similar experience of, not being able to join in the Rudolph game. In a way, it kind of, they develop something else because of it. It's like when I was being bullied in school, you gain a weird sort of, periphery sense where you can just sort of tell who's coming at you to do you harm or do you wrong. You can just sense it, you know, whether it's the person that's going to slam you into a locker or whatever it is. It's so weird because you know it's going to happen. You know it's about to happen. And I think it's kind of a similar thing. As uncomfortable as they made me with my physical self, throughout my life I've struggled with it. I'm not okay with I'm uncomfortable with physical nudity, but in a way they gave me sort of access to an emotional nudity that I was able to, that I felt very comfortable in. And it felt like a stronger armor than a lot of the other things we, try to dress ourselves in, the suits of armor that we build around ourselves. It became this, I don't know, this kind of mech suit of like, well, yeah, okay, come at me with your hate, and I'm going to come back at you with just some mercy and some understanding and some empathy, and let's see how you deal with that. And a lot of the times, people will just like, whoa, like, what? Like, they're kind of shocked by it. I remember this one time when I was growing up in Yellowknife, there was a kid who, he was the kid. He was the kid who started it all, right? The one who, made my life pretty unbearable. And growing up, there was this saying that it was such a stupid question, but it was like it was the weightiest question you could be asked by a bully, and it was, do you want to die? It was like one of those things where it was meant to instigate a fight or let people know that you're being threatened or whatever it is. And I remember this one time he came up to me, and of course he said it, do you want to die? And I basically just said, not all the time. And it just kind of stopped him in his tracks, and was like, he didn't stop being a bully to me, but that day he just kind of like, okay, I'm not going to do anything today. Cause it just kind of made him think about what he was doing, and, ever since then I realized that, a lot of the times there's ways to disarm a situation, or at least let people know what they're doing to you and how it's affecting you. And sometimes that's enough for them to sort of, look at the mirror and see a part of themselves that is perhaps ugly. Sometimes that's all we can do, is just hold up a mirror for people and just let them see themselves in that moment. It's like, do you want to be this all the time?
I agree. And I think that's one of the most powerful aspects of your poetry, the vulnerability. For some reason, it is always a trigger for people to self-reflect upon themselves. And there's something very powerful about that. Another thing I have to ask this. How did you transition from, doing the slams and stuff to posting on YouTube, and how did that blow up? Like, because you're one of the most viral poets, like, in history, in my opinion. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. Like, it's
Patient zero.
Yeah, exactly. How did that start?
Well, it was one of the things that, as much as I credit Slam with giving me my start and, cutting my teeth there and learning all this sort of like editing stuff, and at a certain point it became limiting. There were only certain things you could do inside of Slam. Had to be, you couldn't write anything longer than 3 minutes. Can use props or costume, which wasn't a concern of mine. I wasn't looking to do that. But you also couldn't use music. Yeah. And music is something I've always loved. I write to music. So a lot of the times it's music without words. So that way I can let my own words fill that space. So I listen to a lot of film scores and things like that. And one of the things I always wanted to do was work with the band. And so I formed my own band called The Short Story Long. And, it's funny because as much as I love music, I'm not great at playing it. Like, I can put things together. I can use GarageBand to sort of like give them the general idea of like, here's kind of what I'm looking for, as a kind of like, a paint by numbers sort of thing. But music is such a different language. It's hard to talk about. Like talking about music, especially when you're talking to musicians about what you want or what you're looking for, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. It's kind of, you know, it's difficult, but I was really blessed in finding people that understood what I was going for and were there to sort of apply that, God, this is going to sound bad, emotional lubricant, I guess, is music has a way of just sort of getting into those cracks of us, you know? And, you know, a lot of the time, you know, people are standoffish to poetry because they think back to, you know, one of the old books that they got in school. I stole those books from school. I loved those books, but I understand why other people didn't. You know, it just felt very alien to them. So I wanted to do something that was able to sort of, you know, put people at ease and squeeze into those places that perhaps, you know, those cracks that they left sort of open, and just sort of, you know, go inside that with, this all sounds so sexual because I said emotional lubricant. I can't get away from it now. But that was kind of the idea behind it. And I always loved that sort of cinematic form of music, you know, those musical scores you see in films. You know, if you ever watched a movie and you took the music away, some of those scenes, they wouldn't hit you the same way.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, those emotional, you know, whether it's a moment from Dead Poet Society or whatever, it's like, if you watch that same scene without music, would it hit you the same way? I don't know. Probably not. So it became a very sort of important element to me. And so basically, I wanted to experiment and see what else I could do with the art form, and start doing long form shows, even where it wasn't just me, you know, okay, I'm on stage for, you know, 7 minutes at an open mic. Let me do an actual show. And so that's when I started writing, you know, sort of longer form pieces and things like that. And then working with the sort of visual component, being able to work with the people at Giant Ant, who were the team responsible for creating To This Day. It was kind of a perfect storm moment where they needed something. They wanted me to come in and narrate a bunch of stuff for them and write some things for them. And I thought, like, okay, you know, rather than taking like a really small check for doing this kind of work, can we do a trade? Can we, you know, if I have a poem that I'd like to do something with, would you guys help me work on this? And they got so excited about it. And, you know, it just kind of caught fire from there. And it was one of those right moments, right time, right place, right time, right approach to working with other creatives. One of my favorite things to do is collaborate. There's so much that happens inside of that, you know, it's electric. There's, you know, a lot of things come out of it, and it sets you off in a lot of different ways, and, you know, it gives you different ideas about how to do things. So that was my first experience with that, and that was the genesis of how that piece became.
And see, that was actually going to be my next question. How did you even get in connection? How did you connect with those animators? And like, did they reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? And what other projects have you worked on since To This Day with those animators?
Those animators specifically, we haven't worked on. I tend to work with different people each time just to get a different aesthetic. And a different, you know, to give everybody else a chance and stuff. But all those people came together. Giant Ant they're an amazing studio in Vancouver, and they do really cool work. And, you know, their process with it was like, hey, instead of us doing just sort of one style here, let's reach out to everyone we know, because they knew a lot of different animators. And then it was just this sort of question of like, let's give everybody a chunk. So that would, because it'll take forever if we're just like, we're working on one big thing start to finish. You know, if we have everybody working at the same time, then we can stitch this together in a way, in sort of a collage or a mosaic. And that was the idea behind creating the piece, because you know, it was one of those things too, like metaphorically, what I wanted to achieve, like when I was talking to them, was this isn't a thing that just I am dealing with. Lots of different people are dealing with this or have dealt with this or know about this. And so it was one of the important elements to have all these different styles, attacking it at the same time, because it lent to that metaphor of like, here's what it looks like to different people, and I just thought, it was so perfect. It's still something I'm immensely proud of.
And so when it came to trolls or shoulders, how did you get connected with those animators? I'm really asking for selfish reasons because I plan on I plan on collaborating with non-poet artists as well in the future, and I need to know how to network pretty much. So how did that come about?
Yeah. It's people that you meet along the way. For Trolls, it was Amazing Factory. I know these two. Well, I know everybody in the band. There's a band called We Are the City. Great band. They've since broken up, but they still do a lot of film stuff. And they started this production company called Amazing Factory. And the images that you see throughout Trolls is done by an artist in Victoria named Gareth Godin. And he's somebody I knew just from going he runs a comic book shop there. And he does a cartoon a day. He does a one-page cartoon every day. That's been his thing for years, and he's never missed a day. And there was just something about his style that, I really liked. He can do something that's very storybook. And that was the idea behind the approach to doing that piece. And so we took these still images and just found a way to the guys at Amazing Factory found a way to sort of manipulate them in such a way that it would give that sense of animation, even though we didn't do any clear animation. We took static images and just sort of like found ways to give them motion that would allow us to tell a story, or say, what I needed to say in that piece. And so the idea behind it obviously was that it was that very fairy tale start. Because the first time I ever heard the expression trolls, immediately I'm thinking of fantasy movies like Willow and things like that. I didn't understand what they meant by it. But then going around and going into schools and talking to students, realizing this is a very different era that you're growing up in. It's like, for me, bullying was done when school was done, unless I saw them outside of school, which happened invariably. By the time that last school bell rung, it was like, okay, I'm done suffering for today. Different era for kids in this generation, where they can get at you through your computer and you can be harassed online, and I started to learn all these things, like talking to students in schools and just how sort of bullying has evolved for them. It was bad enough when I was growing up because there were no posters on the wall, there were no support groups, there were no, nobody talked about bullying. So in going into schools, I thought okay, well, this is great. People are talking about it, and then talking to students about it, and them sort of talking about their experiences, and realizing, wow, you're dealing with something much different than I have dealt with. Even though it's something I still deal with. There are bullies still today that they want to peck at you, they want to leave a comment on your whatever it is, and try and get at you that way. You learn to deal with it as you grow older, but it's always awful. Yeah. And so Trolls was the genesis of that, came from that experience. And it was funny too, because when that piece came out, I was like, be prepared. This is going to be kind of a lightning rod for that exact behavior. And I remember somebody writing an article about it, being like, well, this is it. I guess we can't criticize them in any way because, and it's like, that is not what this is about.
At all.
I can take criticism. But there's a line. There's a line where criticism becomes something else. There's, and it was one of those things in school too, where it's like, even the word bullying is too cute of a word for what happens sometimes. Because sometimes what's happening is assault.
Yeah.
Sometimes what's happening is battery. Or, you know, there's just a lot of like really terrible ways for it to branch off. You know, there's a story I remember about a girl who was going to school, and you know, she was the brunt of the joke, and she was the lightning rod for bullying in her school. She got bullied all the time, and then this group of kids who you know, had tormented her a lot were like, hey, you know, look, we're sorry and stuff. Do you want to come have lunch with us? Like, we're going to go out into the, you know, into the wooded area and stuff like that. And she thought, wow, this is, thank you. Yeah, of course. Like, you know, and so they basically took this girl out into the woods, and then they just left her there, which doesn't sound terrible. It's like, until you realize that she's blind. And then it becomes a whole different thing. Like, that is reckless endangerment. You know, that is, so a lot of the times I feel that bullying doesn't encapsulate, the word bullying can encapsulate some of the true cruelty that spills out from the umbrella that they put everything under for bullying.
Yeah. Like I said before, the bullying I experienced was part of the reason why I was just so enthralled with your poetry when I first came across it. I got bullied specifically because I'm the child of Nigerian immigrants. But I was born and raised here, so I sounded like a lot of my classmates. I even looked like a lot of my classmates. But because of because of the way my parents sounded, or see, that's why I got this water. My bad.
I'm in the same spot as you. All right, like water break.
Mhm. Awesome. So a part of the reason why I was bullied anyway, in spite of not having like very overt differences, was because of my parents. When they'd come to pick me up from school, they sounded real different. They called me by a different name, my African name. They'd prepare like African lunches for me, which smelled different and tasted different than whatever my friends had. And so, yeah, I got bullied pretty hard about that, which even caused me to like even hate my Nigerian side and try to like hide it to the best of my ability growing up.
Right.
Yeah, so
I know a bit about that as well. My dad is Indigenous, and I don't know if you know about residential schools in Canada or not, but he was part of what's called the 60s scoop, where basically Indigenous children were taken from their homes and taken from their parents and placed into residential schools, where they received a lot of abuse. And so my dad is, you know, our relationship suffers because he hasn't been able to sort of deal with the trauma that he received from that. My grandmother worked in a receiving home, which was a home for abused children. So she had firsthand sort of, you know, she had witnessed a lot of, you know, the aftermath of these schools and, you know, what it was happening to these kids. And a lot of the times that led to addiction and things like that. And my grandmother was, you know, very concerned for me. I can't say what she did was the right thing or not, but she basically told me, look, you've got this amazing camouflage from your mom's side, and it's just better that you not let other people know. And so I grew up very afraid of something inside my own blood, and and because of that, you know, people ask, it's like, well, what's your, you know, they know that, you know, my background is, you know, being half this and half that, but they want me to define it. And I'm like, my identity is identity crisis. And that's been it from the kind of get-go. Being taught to be afraid of some part of myself for reasons I didn't understand. But really, it was just her trying to keep me safe.
yeah,
Because that kind of stuff was still going on up until very recently. Canada, you know, we have this sort of reputation of being this country where it's like, oh, it's all good, and we're so kind and we're so nice. There has been some truly horrific things happen in the history of Canada, particularly to Indigenous people. The reason we have vitamins is because of Health Canada doing nutrition experiments on Indigenous children. So it's hard to talk about, and I don't even know how to talk about it because I feel so removed from that part of myself, where it's like my dad and I talk, but it's so strained because there is this barrier of talking about what happened. So in terms of your situation and going to school and starting to resent that part of yourself, even though it's that it's where you come from, I totally understand that. And it's just it's so awful, and I'm so sorry that you went through that, because it's a part of my life that I've wanted to embrace for a long time, but I don't know how. I can't seem to break through and with my own dad even. And so if I can't do that, how am I going to do that, in general? So I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. Hey, it's something I'm still trying to figure out too. I'll let you know if I figure it out,
Please do. Yeah. If you have any tips for me, for sure, I could use your help.
Yeah. Poetry has helped me reconcile a lot of things about my past. And I wouldn't be surprised if poetry was the avenue, or the tool rather, to, I guess, reclaim or reconnect with that part of my identity. We'll certainly see.
One of the beautiful things about poetry is that it does help us reconcile everything. It's that sort of emergency that occurs of having to get it down on paper to sort of, prove that you're living it, that you're going through it, that it's real, and you aren't just imagining it. And, it's a great way to it's such a good way to look back on your life too. And, all these poems you've written about these chapters of your life, or these moments, these tiny things. And yeah, there are times where I'm just like, when I'm depressed or whatever, I can go back and look at a poem and it'll just make me smile, because I remember that. And that was a good day, and it's like, if I can remember there was a good day back then when it was bad, there's going to be a good day tomorrow or the next day or whatever down the road somewhere. It's not always going to be this, It's an important reminder, I think.
A great one. I know some of your common themes in your poetry, but I'm not going to assume that everyone watching this video knows who you are. So
Right.
What would you say are some common themes? And I have a next question that's connected to that, but let's go ahead and address this one first.
Oh, yeah. A lot of it is just the abacus of grief and trying to calculate those feelings within yourself. Grief is, it's like a terrible landlord. It never tells you when the rent is due. It just shows up and expects payment, and you never know when it's going to come. It comes in installments even, like these waves that sort of hit you. And so a lot of it is that. And, a lot of it is, I've dealt with a lot of loss in my life, so there's certainly the grief factor. But some of it is love.
I'm so sorry. Can you give me one brief moment?
Yeah.
I have a little brother who has autism, and so sometimes social cues can be rather difficult for him.
Totally understand.
All right, I'll be right back.
No problem.
Thank you for your patience, seriously.
No problem. Oh, I guess rather than us just sitting here in silence, I can talk to you all and say thank you for tuning in and, being a fan of Kendrick, who I met, actually, I'll just tell you, I met him through a teacher friend of mine sent me one of his response videos to one of my poems. And she'd been using his work in her class to get kids excited about poetry. And it was so effective, she just wanted to send me some of his work. And that's how I met him. Sorry, I'm just talking to the audience. I wanted to fill, and so I was telling them the story of how I actually got connected with you, which was through the teacher who shared your work with me, and so I just wanted to fill that empty void rather than sit here in silence. Sorry.
Oh wow, I really appreciate that. Thank you. I was gonna edit the silence out. No one would have even known, but I'm gonna ask that question soon enough because even though you gave me the vague explanation of how you found out about me,
Yeah.
I want to know about it in detail. But so sorry to interrupt. Feel free to finish what you were saying earlier.
Oh, no, it's fine. Basically, yeah. What had happened was there's a teacher who has used my work in their classrooms before, to get kids excited about poetry, but they were still very shy to engage. And so I'm not sure how she found you, but she found you online, YouTube. You were reacting to one of my poems, and she played that for the kids in class, and you made it cool for them to start talking about poetry and start talking about their reactions and things like that. So it was just it was a very exciting thing. And so, she sent me some of your work, and through that, through my sort of, SHANE KOYCZAN Investigates agency, found you on Instagram, and realized that you'd follow me, and then reached out to you. And yeah, it all kind of snowballed from there, from that moment.
Exactly.
And here we are.
Yeah. And what's wild is we just started conversing over DMs at first, and it was like about a week after, or maybe a few days after, where my girl was like, "Hey, why don't you ask him to be on the podcast?" And I was like, "Why didn't I think of that?" I think I was so starstruck from you DMing me that it didn't even cross my mind to see if you wanted to talk further, but like actually talk,
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so glad that, like I said, it's been a struggle to get to this point just because of the chaotic nature of, the world. But I'm so glad we were tenacious about it, and that we're getting to connect.
Exactly. And I think this is going to bless a lot of people.
So tell your girlfriend, good idea.
I will. I'll make sure to. You were talking about common themes in your poetry. You had mentioned how a lot of it stems from like trying to process grief. I had kind of cut you off when I had to leave. Was there anything further you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, that's it's a major theme in my work, but it's not the only one. I write about love. I write about longing. I write funny poems about not wanting to go to the bathroom in your friend's house because you're afraid they'll hear, and things like that. There's just life throws you inspiration from all sorts of angles, and it's just about what you catch in those moments. But this is one of the other things that people ask me about is, how do you get inspired? You don't inspiration doesn't come from you. It's an outside force. It comes at you through what you experience. And so a lot of the times it's just, catching that butterfly as it flies by, and just not to sort of pin to the, the wall to dissect or anything, but just to, look at its colors and then let it fly away. I think there's probably only 7 major themes in the world. And, at times we touch on all of them because at times those are the ones that are affecting us. And so, I don't think I know a single poet who hasn't written about all those sorts of different themes or stays on one theme forever.
You kind of touched on this ever so slightly, your creative process, right? So you talked about how inspiration will come to you and you'll inspect whatever is inspiring you and then let it continue on. Use the butterfly metaphor. Can you go into more detail about your creative process? Like, do you use voice notes? Do you always do you ever type? Like, how does it all work?
Voice notes are super handy. Sometimes it's scribbled down things, and it's I did an art piece a while ago that was just sort of showing the process, and it was like a mash of napkin parts and scraps of paper and little recordings and stuff, and it's like, here are all the pieces, and then sort of like using thread to sort of connect each one, and then using red thread to cross through the things that ended up in purgatory and stuff like that, and sort of trying to show the visual process. But yeah, you arrive at things differently each time, I think. I love writing, when I sit down to write a piece, I love finishing it the first time. Not that it is the end product the first time, because editing is a totally different monster. The first draft, though, you should be able to whip out the first draft very quickly. The work, the heavy lifting comes in the editing. It comes from chipping away those parts and saying goodbye to those lines that, sorry, you didn't quite make it, this time, but, I got a place for you. So a lot of the times what I tend to do is write backwards. I start with the ending and then I write to the beginning. Just because I want the ending is usually the thing that I'm trying to say the most. It's where I want to leave people. A lot of the times I'll start with the last line and then it just kind of goes. It's like, I kind of imagine it like in Star Wars when the beginning is like sort of rolling by, but it's doing it in reverse. You know what I mean? So that's how it's sort of happening for me. If that makes sense, it feels a bit like a Frankenstein, right? Mm-hmm. You're putting all these different body parts together and trying to give it life. You want to let it walk and hope that it doesn't run around town tearing people's arms off and things like that. Right. But it's really about just sort of like anything, you add structure. You start with the skeleton, then you add the organs, and then you add the musculature, and the last thing you're adding is the skin. And that's really how that's the best I can explain my process.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't actually know where I'm starting when I begin a poem. What often happens with me is that there's a line that will pop in my head and I'll be like, oh, I have to use that line for something. And so I'll just throw it on the page. And then from there, I'm using like word associations to see like what can be connected to that. So let's say a line came about trees or something like that. Yeah. From there, I'm like, okay, what are some word associations with trees? There's leaves, there's roots, there's flowers, there's dirt, soil, sand. From there, I'm thinking of oxygen, sunlight, water. And before you know it, I have like all these words pertaining to trees. And it's very possible that I might scrap all of that entirely and start word associations with another word in that initial sentence. It could very well happen, But that's often how I start. And then stuff just starts building from there. I think there's only one time I've ever written a poem where the first line I got in my head, I knew for certain. I was like, oh, that's going to be the end. I knew it instantly. And it wasn't even a line I created myself. It was a quote from a basketball player. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if you watch basketball, but Kyrie Irving.
Okay.
Yeah, he had this one quote, and it was just so profound to me. Random too. It was on his Twitter. He dropped it, but like the quote went viral, and so I remember seeing that, and I was like, "That's going to be the end of this poem." And suddenly, I started reverse engineering it, working backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it. Yeah, reverse engineering is a good way to put it. And I love that, like there's found poetry all over the place. Yeah. Whereas like people say things and you're just like, whoa. I remember when you guys had that flood down in New Orleans or Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. And there was, people were, they were interviewing people from the city and stuff like that. And, one guy just in passing, I can't remember the question that they were asked, but he said something and it just rung so poetically poignant and just epically profound to me. He said, sometimes you just got to put an H on your chest and handle it. And I was like, God. It's one of those things where it's like, I wish I wrote that.
Right? Oh, man. Yeah. So my next question is what is your reason and motivation for crafting your art?
I think that's evolved too. I think in the very beginning it was just for me. And then, when I realized I could, I could use it to connect with people, it became, I guess that was probably still for me, actually, because I wanted community, because I wanted, and now it feels like I'm just trying to help in some way, or I'm just trying to give comfort to people who, they know what it is, they don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times it comes down to just sort of giving a voice to the people who are voiceless. I get so many requests from people. It's like, hey, can you write about this? And hey, can you write my wedding vows and things like that? And it's just like, oh man, you got to be pretty picky about the sort of ones that you're willing to sort of, take on. But like the harshest ones, the harshest things always come from kids. And it's like one of the blessings and curses of, having teachers share my work is the reactions, the responses I get from kids. Because a lot of the time the kids who are reaching out are the kids who are out on their particular ledge. And one of the harder aspects of that is you don't always know what happens to them, because I'm just a poet. All I have are the numbers. Here's a number you can reach out to. Here's someone you can talk to. I'm not trained to talk to you in this way. I can listen to you, absolutely, and sometimes that's enough. And then sometimes, you send a message back and you don't get anything back, and you just have to somehow be okay with never knowing, which is tough. But anyway, sorry.
It's okay. Yeah.
Should we read our poems? I realize that we're coming up on our last little bit here. This is such an awkward segue.
No, for those of you who are unaware, the both of us actually crafted a poem on the topic of treasure. And it was inspired by, I think you said a friend of yours had a child who
yeah, we were all out for dinner, and we had been just sort of talking on IG, and I thought it'd be a cool idea to sort of like just trade poems. And originally I thought like, oh, well, let's just pick something from our repertoire. But I'm always a person who, let's make something new instead, rather let's give ourselves homework, which can sometimes be exciting. And so I was out for dinner with my friends, and, I was talking about the idea with them, and sort of, it's like, yeah, we need some kind of, a prompt, some place that we can both jump off from and, see what we end up with. And their son just, sort of blurted out, you should write about treasure. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, why not? Let's see what comes out of that. And of course, you were very, amenable to that idea. So we both ended up crafting our own poems, and I'm excited to hear yours.
Thank you. Okay, I'm nervous. I know.
Oh, yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
Tell me though, give me a bit of backstory about like what it's about. And
Yes. Okay. So this poem is actually called Pearl, and it's based off of a Persian legend, or at least that was kind of the impetus for the poem. I'm not going to spoil what the legend is, but long story short, I'm using the pearl to describe a woman who helped me appreciate beauty, I guess you could say. And so I know I'm being super vague here, but
It's
I'll
okay.
leave it at that. I hate spoiling poems, so that's pretty much why. But yeah, I guess I'll just use this to hop right into the poem. So I hope everyone enjoys. According to Persian legend, pearls were created when a rainbow touched the earth after a storm. The story states that the flaws in the sea gems were caused by thunder and lightning. Now, I doubt this tale is true, but I must say that even among gemstones, pearls have rather unique qualities. See, that only proved to be more true the more I got to know you. For example, as a pearl, have you ever been told that you resemble a crystal ball? Okay, okay. Now, not so much in shape, all right, more so in ability, because you be replaying my highlight reel from vivid memory to showcase the traits you find most admirable about me, which is to say, you affirm me and see the best in me. I treasure the supportive words that you invest in me, and anytime I'm grinding unhealthily, you insist that I get enough rest and sleep, and I take you seriously, but not too seriously. Because every now and then I tease and poke fun at your obsession with fashion and hairstyling. And each time I do, like clockwork, I watch as you use a crescent palm to eclipse your solar smile. Now, why would you do such a thing? Why hide my daily reminder to grin like I'm guaranteed to win? Why cover the glaring proof that you do not look like the hurt that you've been through? The evidence that you are far more than the sum of your past pain. Don't hide them pearly whites. On God, that smile is more infectious than COVID. Don't just show it, baby pearl, baby girl. You gotta own it. Nothing perplexes me more than a pearl who was unaware of her worth. See, you once asked me if I desire you specifically because you happen to be a honey in close proximity. No, no, it's because I have standards. Do not misunderstand, Shorty. I had no shortage of options. You were not my only option. Nah, but you were my best one. And for that reason, I want you by my side on this day and the next one. See, the thing about pearls is that they're not only rare, but also quite difficult to fake. In other words, I know a real one when I see one. A novice might fail to distinguish a glass marble from a precious pearl, but I am no amateur. To this trained eye, it's like the difference between a candle and a torch, a juice box and a wine glass, a teddy bear and a grizzly, a Volkswagen and a Lexus. But pearl or not, you are by no means immaculate. Dare I say you can be so annoying. You're such a baby sometimes, but I'll say it this one time for the one time. I enjoy that about you. You might be a brat, but you're my favorite brat. So I'll let you in on a little trade secret among gem appraisers, all right? The reason a single quality pearl possesses such great value is quite simple. It's the closest man can get to holding the moon in his hands. Understand that I plan to hold the moon in my hands. But unlike the moon with its crater-filled landscape, even a pearl of great value is not absent of blemishes. As I'm sure you know, you are no goddess, you are no angel. Just like any other mere mortal, you say and do things that you are not proud of. And that is okay, because just like the moon, you shine anyway. It's no wonder folks hold you to the sun, observe your glimmer, and end up with such high expectations for you. The pressure to live up to them is draining. Believe me, I would know. So when your energy is expelled from having experienced the excessive exhaustion of exemplifying excellence and exceeding everyone's expectations, expect me to extend a firm reminder that I do not desire perfection from you, but instead your best. For your best will always be enough.
That's beautiful, man. How do you feel about it?
I feel pretty good. I do think it needs more editing, and I think it's having a bit of trouble deciding what it really wants to be about. Um,
That's that's the process, though, right?
yeah,
It's so rare. Does the poem like end up what it first was, end up being what it first was? And so I totally get what you're saying. I love that idea, though, too. One of the most interesting things about pearls, too, is one of the things that perhaps gives them greater value than their actual the way they're valued makes them even more precious is that pearls can go extinct because the ocean can go extinct. It's like all these other rubies and gemstones that we sort of collect throughout, the world. They're hidden deep in the earth and they're hard to find and things like that. but pearls could actually, you know, oysters, mussels, they're the liver of the sea,
Yeah.
and the sea is dying, right? So it's one of those things too where it's just like, and the way they're made, and the reason, you know, they're made, the reason that clams make them and things like that. It's just there's so much there to dive into. And even diving, pearl divers, the people who dive so deep for them, you know,
Right.
on a single breath, like there's just endless ways you can go with it, and so that's pretty exciting.
Thank you. And see, I wasn't even thinking of that. Like just the process of how like the pearl actually comes from irritation in the
Yeah,
clam.
exactly.
And it's like, wow, look at how beauty can come out of an irritant. You know, that's
Absolutely.
I might have to use that. I hope you don't mind.
No, this is why we talk about poetry, man. This is why we do it, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm excited for you, and like, I mean, please send me, like, I mean, if it evolves past what it was, I'd love to hear the next iteration.
you got it. You got it. Okay, so I guess it's your turn at this point, you know?
Oh gosh, uh, now I'm like, I have to follow that.
Uh,
Jesus. So I had kind of a different approach, I guess, on this, was sort of coming at it from the wreckage point of view, and that sort of like, you know, those spaces inside of us that, you know, are somewhat sunken, and having to sort of like wrestle back the treasures in ourselves that we're not willing to let go of, those parts of ourselves that we value so much. We we just can't let them stay down with the sunken ship. You know what I mean? So this is the piece I wrote. It's called The Wreckage. Let me just get a sip of water.
you're good.
I may stumble all over this because, like I said, it's not in my body yet. It's very new. Just because we learn how to heal doesn't mean we're not scarred. Life doesn't have to hit us very hard before we remember pain. If you've ever had to navigate a one-way road, you would know there's no such thing. People get lost. Done it myself. Wandered too far down paths that weren't meant for me. The problem with sight is you can't always see what the right thing to do is. We need vision. A way to see past our excuses and accept the fact that when we pull ourselves from the wreckage, we must be prepared to accept that some of what's broken is our fault. And that maybe it isn't just our lives burning in a pile on the asphalt, that maybe we aren't the only ones hurting. And if flirting with disaster was a good idea, maybe not every broken heart would need a transplant. They could just skip a beat, but find their way back to a rhythm. There's something in them they thought they lost when they realized their beliefs would cost conviction. Yeah, you better believe what you believe. Because when the rent is due, debt is going to come at you as hard as doubt. Louder than the shout you kept to yourself when you heard your heart break like a bone, when you felt something in you snap. The one thing we will always owe pain is our attention. It is the landlord that collects whenever it decides to show up, and the mortgages we take out on love doesn't mean they've got us covered. Sometimes we have to reshingle the roof to keep the rain off our backs like proof that we aren't drowning. Sometimes honesty is so quiet, silence keeps asking for permission to speak. The truth is there's nothing unique about fear. We just feel it for different reasons, and sometimes more profoundly. Sometimes we become wreckage. We allow fright to twist our courage into something sharp enough to cut us. But we aren't ruined because we're bleeding. We're only bleeding because it hurts. It only hurts because that's what it does sometimes. Sometimes change becomes a prescription we've earned. Medicine to remind us that if we've learned anything about our past, it's that sometimes in the wreckage we find treasure worth keeping. That beneath the tarnish, there's something worth saving. That the patina doesn't dull the shine of the flag we are waving when we signal the surrender of us to ourselves and learn to treasure the wreck for becoming a scar that will never fade. It is the mark on the map that reminds us to remember that a wound can be more precious than anything we would ever trade to forget it. And that if even after all this time it still hurts, we can't just pretend it doesn't. We have to let it.
That was loaded, Shane. That was That was loaded.
I'm so glad we did homework together, man.
Me too. Me too. And maybe that might be a new trend I'll do for the podcast series. Like anytime I
Oh,
have
I don't know. I think I need to use it in my own podcast because now you kind of inspiring me to get out here.
man, that was really beautiful, bro. Man,
Thank you. It's
uh,
nice to trade sometimes, right?
it is. It is. And how do you feel about the poem?
Yeah, I feel it's one of those things where I'm pretty happy with the way it's ended up. And when I say ended up, it's like that is so far from the first version of this. It's like I said, I it generally goes through a number of edits before I'm able to get it to a place where it feels like what I want it to feel like. And I'm pretty happy with the way that one feels. A lot of people ask me too about like, how do you get that sort of rhythmic style going for you? And that comes in through the editing process. First draft, there's no rhyming. I'm just trying to say what I'm trying to say. And then I figure out how to say it in a way that's, it's got that sort of flow and things like that. And people ask me about that all the time too. It's like, where did you pick up on that? One of the most exciting things when I was growing up, and, this is going to date me pretty hard, is, that first exposure to hip hop. And for me, it was like Young MC, I think was the first one for me. But, growing up in that sort of era of music where it's like you bought a rock album and you'd get those liner notes in the cassette and they're about that long, because all the songs were like, you're just repeating the same long and the chorus, and they're all very short. I got my first, I picked up Young MC's first cassette and unfolded, this huge tome, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And so it was one of those beautiful moments. And then, discovering artists like Ani DeFranco and the way they spoke. The big one for me was Gil Scott Heron, and, I had a great librarian who would expose me to things all the time that were not on the curriculum that they did not want to teach in school and stuff. But like, the first time I heard something like "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," I was like, oh my God, and it was probably that same reaction that you had when you first heard someone like me. There's voices that you encounter that, they just reach you at that right moment. There were these times, I was in a very dark place when we lost Kurt Cobain. I was a big fan of him and the way he wrote and stuff like that. And there was this huge void that happened, after his passing, until I discovered Tracy Chapman, and until I discovered Ani DeFranco, and until Leonard Cohen creeped his way back into my life, and all these sort of things. It's people ask us about our voices. Our voices are made up of the voices we encounter and the voices that mean something to us. And so let's end by saying thank you for your voice, man.
I did have one more question. Do you have time for one more or no?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Which artists would you like to collaborate with in the future and why?
Oh, man. It's such a tough question because there's so many different mediums I'd apply that to. Let's go musically, because music's a big part of writing for me right now. I would say Max Richter. Max Richter is a composer. He's worked on shows like The Leftovers, and he just has this very beautiful cinematic smile. Or style, sorry. I don't know what a smile looks like, but his style is just like, it lends itself so much to the work that I do. I listen to a lot of his stuff, kind of on repeat as I'm writing poems. For the poem that I just read you, I was listening to The End of All Our Exploring, which I encourage you to check out. Like, I mean, it's a beautiful piece of music to write to. So if you get a chance, listen to that. But I would love to collab with him. Hopefully one day, maybe. You never know.
Yeah. Honestly, I have a dream of collaborating with two cinematic composers. The first is Hans Zimmer.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And for those of you who don't know him, you've definitely heard some of his stuff before. Think of like the original Batman trilogy with Christopher Nolan, like the Dark Knight Rises, stuff like that. He was composing.
Interstellar.
Yeah, Interstellar, Inception, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some big name movies. A lot of his
I think he
scores.
also did like Platoon back in the. He's done so much amazing stuff for sure.
And like I've written to a lot of his stuff too, because for some reason when I listen to music with words, this isn't so surprising now that I think about it. It kind of clashes with my own word creation, and so
Absolutely.
I need something that just sets the tone but doesn't interrupt my thought process. Hans Zimmer has always been that for me, and I'll just search up one of his songs that have like the tone I'm looking for, and I'll just like write based on that. The other composer is Zach Hemsey. I'm less familiar with his stuff, but there's a few of his songs that set the tone for some of the poems I've created as well. So, yeah, I would love
So
to.
cool. A lot of the times too, it's like if there is a song that I really like a pop song or a hip hop song or whatever, I'll try to find an instrumental version of it and write to that. Or if one doesn't exist, I'll then just ask my band like, "Hey, can you record me a version of this?" And I'm so lucky to have these people in my life.
Yeah. How did you even connect with those with your band members in the first place? And what was the story for the title of the band?
Yeah, the title of the band is long and convoluted, and sadly forgotten at this point how we arrived at that title. After my granddad passed away, my grandmother was alone in the Okanagan, which I didn't like the idea of, and she had called me and asked me if I would move home. That was a very difficult decision because my career was just taking off in Vancouver. And Penticton's a really small place, and you're just like, there's no opportunities here for me to do anything. But, you know, the call of family is sometimes greater than the call of anything else. And so I found a way to make it work career-wise and family-wise. Not always easy, but grateful that I did. And when I came back here, I was originally in a band called Tofu, Tons of Fun University, with C.R. Avery and Mike McGee. And it was more sort of hip hop oriented. But I was always, sort of my background is sort of folk music and things like that, and alternative and movie scores. And that's the kind of stuff I wanted to work on. And so when I moved back, I connected with a friend from high school, Maya Robbie, who she's amazingly beautiful and a talented songwriter. And, she plays guitar, and, through her, I just sort of started connecting with other people around town, going to the various open mics, and sort of pieced a band together out of them. And it's evolved in a lot of different ways since then. There are people who have come into the band and, they, make their contribution, and they're like, "Hey, I want to go do this thing." And it's like, of course, absolutely. Like, and it's amazing how we sort of cheer each other on and sort of support in that way. And so, I'm very grateful to them, and the number of iterations that band has gone through. Maya's been the constant force through that band. She's the band leader. But right now it consists of Jesse Lee, Jeremy Sauer, Jordy Robinson, and Maya Robbie. And they're just amazing to work with because they get what I'm trying to do. I've worked with other musicians where it's just like, it's super challenging because they're really into what they want to do, and that's totally fine. That's great, but that just means that we can't find a language together. Yeah. Where it's like, the people, my band, are able to sort of like, we're supporting you. We're supporting, the words have to rest on top of the music. It's got to be, they get what I'm trying to do. And it's just really beautiful to work with people who, they have their other projects where they're able to do that music, that, challenge themselves musically and stuff like that. But for this particular project, they're able to sort of let that musical ego go aside and realize this is why we're doing this, is to support. And I'm just so grateful to work with them.
Nice.
I'm losing my voice now, so I feel like we have to wrap up.
Yeah. In that case, let's just wrap up by you can promote your website,
Oh,
social.
we didn't even talk about the book and the tour and the
Okay, perfect.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay, so you've told me you have a book that you're coming out with. I'm mind blown. I'll be the first to pre-order. All right, so please let everybody know what the book is about. All that. Promote it.
Well, here's the thing. It's like there's a number of books coming out, but the one that's coming out immediately is one of the issues that I've touring in the States. Touring the States is very hard for Canadians or for anybody from abroad, really. You have to get a special visa for it, which costs in the thousands of dollars. And when you apply for it, there's no guarantee that you'll get it. And even if you don't get it, you don't get your money back. They don't make the process easy. And then once you're working in the States, there's a 30% withholding fee. So it makes it really hard to actually touring already is a really tough sort of job. There's so many expenses, your travel, your food, your accommodations, and so on and so forth. A lot of things add up, so it's really hard, especially when 30%, that's the profit margin. So really the only way I'm able to make money at shows that I do in the States is by selling books. And for the longest time, I've not been able to bring books across the border because tariffs make it too expensive to do that. So recently, very recently, I partnered with Write Bloody, who has published a lot of great poetic authors that you probably already know of. Andrea Gibson, Anis Mojgani, Buddy Wakefield, all these incredible writers. So very happy to be joining the roster and very happy to be able to finally tour with a book in the United States. And this book is called Barely Amazing. And it is an anthology made up of all my other books, all of my sort of most requested pieces when I go on tour. Because one of the things I've always felt bad about is like, people come up after a show and they want a book, they want something signed or whatever. And I'm like, sorry, I'm not allowed to have any. And so this hopefully will be a game changer that allows me to tour more in the States and actually still support myself. It's one of the things, it's tough being an artist for sure, but you do it because you're not doing it for the money. One of my favorite quotes is there's no money in poetry. And then somebody, I can't remember who, said, yeah, but there's no poetry in money. And so I always thought that was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But yeah, the book is coming out. Sorry, I get sidetracked by all these things. The book is coming out in June. I've got 3 shows set up in the States, one in Portland, Oregon, at the Alberta Rose Theater, then Eugene, Oregon at Tsunami Books, one of my favorite little bookshops out of all the places I've been to. And they set up and they do these really I love doing the big shows, absolutely, but there's something about those intimate shows that is just super special. And Tsunami Books is, they just got such a great space and they're such great people. So excited to get back there. And then finishing up in Seattle at the Triple Door. I think will be my last show for a little while for that small run. And then hopefully November we start touring again. But that is the news about the book coming out with Write Bloody. Barely Amazing. I'll post about it I send out a newsletter every month from my website, which is www.SHANE KOYCZAN.com. Hopefully you can spell that for people at the bottom. So it's a tough one. And every month I put out, a new poem that you can download. So if you liked the poem you heard today on the podcast with Kendrick, that'll be the poem that I post this month. And, usually I ask for like just $1 donation for, and you can download it and it's yours forever. And none of that money goes to Spotify because Spotify doesn't pay artists. So there you go. It doesn't take much to support the arts, but we appreciate all your support. And that's all I have to. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It means the world to me, and you're as down to earth as I knew you were. As I expected. So, yeah, thank you so much, and everyone, stay tuned for more, for sure. Not just more from this channel, but more from Shane as well. All right. If you don't know him, now you got to know him a little bit. Check out his YouTube channel. It's mind blowing. Check out his book for sure, his website as well. It's gonna blow you away. All right.
And teachers out there, other teachers out there, if you're interested in getting your kids to actually engage and talk about poetry, I suggest looking up this guy and just sort of, using the poems that he uses. He really has a way of getting kids excited about talking about poetry. So as much as I'm so grateful that you use my work in your classrooms, sometimes kids are shy to get started in talking about it. And Kendrick, you've really opened up a path forward for a lot of these kids. So I thank you. And teachers, thank you.
That's the highest praise I've gotten in a long time. All right. So that's a good time to end it. I'll see y'all later. Deuces.